Broadcast is now starting.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on vendor management in the context of various regulations like PCI, ISO, FERC, NERC, HIPAA, and FSMA. My name is Kishore Veswani. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of ControlCase, and I appreciate your time today to attend this webinar on vendor management in the context of all these regulations. A few housekeeping items before we get started. As we go through the webinar today, please feel free to ask questions in the questions window, or if you're having any issues seeing the screen or hearing my voice, please feel free to type it in the chat window. Our moderators will be looking at this and will make sure that we address any technical issues that you might run into. A copy of this webinar, as well as a recording of this webinar, will be sent to everybody early next week. Also, please feel free to go to our website, www.controlcase.com, and feel free to listen to either this webinar in the future or any of our past webinars that we have on various topics on our website at www.controlcase.com. That being said, let's get into the meat of our presentation and into our topics of today, which is vendor management and how it ties to compliance, what are some of the best practices, how we have seen some of the challenges in the industry play out, and then the ControlCase solution on how we think vendor management should be done. As I said, we will go over, we'll spend really a majority of our time kind of talking about how a basic approach on vendor management can be followed by all companies out there. Of course, we'll also start with details on what the various regulations are and how vendor management ties back into the regulations. A little bit about ControlCase. Our mission is to make compliance effortless but accurate. We work hard to making sure that your data security posture as a company is flawless, and we use compliance as the dashboard of how a security program should be run. And so we work hard to make sure we make it easy for you as a customer to make compliance effortless but accurate. We're based out of the Washington, D.C. area, customers globally, and really focusing exclusively on IT compliance and security. Here are some of the credentials we have. We are able to certify companies or assess companies or provide reports on multiple regulations, including PCI, SOC, ISO, and HITRUST. We also have the concept where we can collect evidence once and certify you to multiple regulations. As we focus on IT compliance, and we're going to talk about vendor management, let's start with the compliance overview itself and what are some of the regulations that exist out there that actually demand and require vendor management. PCI DSS. PCI DSS has been set by the brands, and these are guidelines to ensure that credit and debit card data is protected in the system. PCI DSS outlines the guidelines for securely processing, storing, and transmitting payment card data. It's managed by the PCI Security Council, and which is with input from all the leading brands that are out there, and truly one of the most successful IT regulations out there in the industry to protect not only cardholder data, but I would say a very prescriptive and analytical method to handle any kind of data out there and protect it. FSMA, It's the Federal Information Security Management Act. Just like what PCI DSS is to the credit card industry, FISMA is to the federal agencies. And the reason we're talking about it is all these regulations require that you have a third party or a vendor management program. HIPAA, we talked about PCI for credit cards, FISMA for federal. HIPAA is to protect healthcare data. And it ensures that in addition to protecting healthcare data, it also touches on various other things like reducing fraud and mandating electronic transactions in the healthcare transaction space. ISO is a much more general purpose, but a horizontal regulation, which also requires vendor management, and it essentially provides a management framework for implementing information security within the organization. This goes beyond just data sets into a more horizontal implementation of information security within the organization. Finally, FERC, NERC, when we talk about that, is the energy equivalent. We have within North America and globally critical infrastructure that powers our electricity, our grid, our nuclear power plants, our hydroelectric power plants. There is critical infrastructure that is out there. That critical infrastructure always requires that there be third parties that support that critical infrastructure. And again, vendor management, when it comes to critical infrastructure, really enforces that we are looking at critical infrastructure and looking at the third parties that look at that. So I talked about all these 5 regulations. I talked about PCI, I talked about ISO, HIPAA, FERC, NERC, and FISMA. All these regulations have one thing in common, as you can see. They require vendor or third-party management. If you want to be compliant to any of these standards, you got to do third-party management as a customer. And that is a necessity. What is third-party management? If you rely as a company on any third-party provider, that is a third party. It could be a cloud like Amazon. It could be a call center. It could be someone who is providing you data processing or software development services. At the end of the day, you as a company, your security and your compliance is dependent on the vendors and the third parties that you outsource certain things to. And so it is extremely important to have a vendor or a third-party management program and document a compliance matrix that says what is your responsibility and what is the responsibility of third parties out there. I'm going to go through a basic 101 high-level process on what can be done either electronically or manually to put a vendor management program in place. It starts with making sure you know who your vendors are, categorizing them, ensuring you manage the risk of control, the list of controls that are important to these vendors, making sure you evaluate them. And we'll talk about a couple of approaches. One approach is to send out a questionnaire, get the responses, and analyze it. The other approach, and really the way the world is moving towards, is a more automated approach on the vendors being able to be assessed on a data security rating. And then finally, any issues you find need to be led to closures. All right, so let's talk about it in detail. Step number 1 is to register an inventory vendors. As they say, you can't control anything you don't know. So the first step always is knowing who your vendors are and whom you depend upon, right? And so it's a basic step, but a necessary step. It can't be overlooked. Then you move to categorizing it. What do the vendors do? Do they provide you hosting services? Do they store sensitive data? Are they geographically specific? These are the types of questions you want to ask to ensure that you can categorize vendors, because based on how they are categorized, you can tell whether there is a low risk, medium risk, or a high risk. That's what you're trying to get to. Once you know what the risk is, you basically ensure that you have a standard program which goes across all these different areas. And again, we will be distributing a copy of these slides so you can bullet point. But if you have a questionnaire or a list you want to evaluate all your vendors by, the master list, it'll cover all these areas. Policy management, their third-party management, asset management, change, incident, data, BCP, compliance, and HR. Now, you have your master list of controls. You need to now map, based on what the vendor does, what controls are appropriate. So if someone is a hosting provider, some set of controls apply. If you're in the cloud, maybe the physical security controls don't apply. So you're really mapping controls to the category. Once that's done, we then start getting into automation. You got to create a vendor risk questionnaire, and again, that could be physical questionnaire. It could be in the new world electronic questionnaire, but it needs to be a list of data you need to collect. Then you need to distribute it to your vendors, again, physically or electronically. And then once they respond, you got to look at it. You got to look at what they have responded with and analyze whether that vendor actually poses a risk based on the data they have provided. We at ControlCase have pioneered a different methodology for steps 5, 6, 7. All the initial steps are still needed. You need to inventory vendors. You need to figure out what their risk is. All those things are really good. We have actually come up with, as I'll talk about later, a data security rating where we can automatically get data from your vendors. They can send data to us on an automated, ongoing basis, and we will give you, in an automated fashion, what the rating of that vendor is. So instead of sending out a questionnaire, them responding, and then a manual intervention on looking at it, we have actually automated that process of looking at getting the data feeds automatically and evaluating it automatically. Of course, just for steps 5, 6, 7, you still need to have an inventory and have to have, once you have exceptions, there's still project management involved to track those exceptions, no matter how you look at it, to closure. Because if you are assessing your vendors, it's not a bad thing, but you're going to find issues. Every company has issues, and you're going to find that. And you got to track that exceptions to closure. So I went through what was a basic 101 methodology for vendor management. Let's talk about some of the common challenges that exist out there. But before I do that, I will go back once more and talk about a high-level process, which is, again, number one, you got to register and inventory who your vendors are. You got to categorize what the vendors do. You got to create a master control checklist. You got to map the controls to the category of vendors they are in. From there, you got to be able to create a method to send and evaluate the data from vendors, whether it's through a questionnaire or some other means. You got to get that data from vendors. You got to evaluate the vendors, and then you got to track any exceptions that you find to closure. So this is the commonality that exists out there in any vendor management program, and you want to ensure that, if you had to go through tactically the 7 or 8 different steps that everyone has to do vendor management, whether you have an electronic platform to do it or not, these would be good 8 steps to do it. All right, let's talk about common challenges. The vendors get assessed all the time, and you had to do vendor management all the time, right? And you could be, when I say you, I mean a company that is looking at vendors, and if you are a vendor, you are getting assessed all the time. there's a lot of redundant efforts and cost inefficiencies. A lot of times, it's all audit-based. There's no dashboard that tells you what are the issues and what is the status of fixing the issues. We live in a world where changes happen all the time, and your third party actually rely on other third parties, which actually become a fourth party. So, that starts getting complicated too. Regulations only keep on increasing. I talked about PCI, HIPAA, FSMA, FERC, and ISO. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more regulations out there that all require vendor management. And so as we talk about that, regulations just keep on increasing. Guess what keeps on decreasing? Budgets, right? So all these challenges make it very difficult to do vendor management, right? And so at ControlCase, we have pioneered a very different system of vendor management, which is essentially automatically rating the data security of vendors. We live in an age where it's not static. An annual audit does not work because the world is changing, right? And things change on a daily basis. You as a customer are demanding that vendors protect your data. You as a vendor, to be competitive in today's environment, have to protect your customers' data. No matter how you look at it, it is there. And the old way was, let's do a questionnaire once a year, and let's come back the next year. Well, guess what? That doesn't work, we think. We think the new way is ensuring that as you evaluate your vendors, or as you're a vendor that needs to get evaluated, you need a rating. The whole world understands Moody's ratings, right? AAA and C. The board understands it, the whole world understands it. And so we have tried to come up with an automated mechanism of rating everybody on a scale of AAA to a C. And vendors can sign up and get rated. Companies can bring up a vendor management program by ensuring that there's real-time automated transparency into the data systems, and it's really based on actual quantitative data. We use technology to audit technology and not just through interviews. And the process works where we get ongoing data on your environment. We are able to analyze the logs on a real-time basis. We are able to analyze the vulnerabilities on a real-time basis. We apply the concepts of data analytics and artificial intelligence to calculate your ratings, and then we are able to report and present it. That does not take away the need for an on-site audit. It just reduces it. So there's an automated data feed that is just helping you be more analytical about protecting the data that your vendors are involved with. It does not take away the need for on-site audit. It just reduces the time and it makes it more accurate. But on-site audits are still needed because there's not, if you have wrong scope and things like that, as many of you know, there is really no point to auditing a wrong scope. So we have changed the way the world works by ensuring that we are automating the process of rating vendors and rating customers. And depending on how you look at it, for a customer, it's a vendor. For a vendor, it's their customers. But we are adding basically a analytical method to rating systems and vendors out there. That being said, I will like to thank everybody on this call for attending this webinar. We will be sending out a copy of this slides. Hopefully, we have shown you a set of steps that can be used easily to put a vendor management program in place. At this point, we will answer any questions that we have. The first question is, from a vendor management perspective, can you get compliant to many of these regulations if you're not managing your vendors properly? So that's a good question. The regulations differ. Obviously, getting compliant to a particular regulation at the minimum requires that there be a vendor management program. Now, you're never going to be in a position where all your vendors have solved, have no issues, right? That's just not possible, because in an IT world, as we talked about, the world is changing, it's very dynamic, and so there are going to be issues. As long as you have a vendor management program that is addressing the biggest risks that exist out there, and you're doing it in a scalable, repeatable manner, you can still get compliant to most of the regulations I talked about, and all the regulations I talked about, as long as you have a good method to do vendor management. The second question is, from a PCI DSS perspective, why would you do vendor management? As an example, I guess PCI is a good example. For PCI DSS, there's a requirement number 12, specifically 12.9, requires that vendor management and third-party management be done if you got to be PCI compliant. So that's just it's actually a checkbox and a requirement that you need to be managing your third parties if you want to be compliant to PCI DSS, as an example in that case. Well, that was the last question I had. I thank you, everybody, for your time. We will be sending out a copy of these slides and a recording. Please feel free to reach out to us at www.controlcase.com in case of any questions that you may have. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thank you.